So I guess the wildest thing I've ever experienced happened last year, and I still don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm making it up. But here we go. It started with these little things going missing. I live alone in a pretty quiet neighborhood, so I figured I was just forgetful. A protein bar here, a sock there, whatever. And my TV would be on a different input than I left it. Nothing huge, just enough to make me second guess myself. The weirdest part is I'd hear these faint bumps in the ceiling sometimes. I chalked it up to raccoons or whatever. My house is old, stuff creaks. But then one night, I came home late from work and I could swear I saw a shadow move past the vent, opening in the hallway ceiling. I told myself I was tired, and it was my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling, so I set up one of those cheap motion sensor cameras I bought off Amazon, pointed it straight at the attic access panel in the hallway. 2 nights later, I got a notification at 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. I opened the clip and my stomach dropped. There was a person climbing down from the attic, like full on, quietly stepping down the ladder, looking around and heading into my kitchen. I froze. I was in the house at the time that clip was taken. I called the cops immediately. I locked myself in my room with a bat, freaking out while they did a full sweep. They found no one at first, but when they checked the attic, there was a little setup up there. A sleeping bag, some snacks, a small camping stove, empty water bottles. Someone had clearly been living up there. The person was my neighbor's grown son, who apparently had some drug issues and got kicked out a while back. He broke in when I was on vacation a few months earlier and just never left. He'd sneak down at night to grab food or watch TV. He got arrested. I moved out 3 weeks later. I still have trouble sleeping in total silence because now every creak makes me think someone's crawling around above me. This is a completely true story and just happened an hour ago. I wanted to talk about it somewhere, and the only place I could think of was surprisingly this subreddit. For context, my wife and I are on vacation in Mexico. We both honestly are loving it here, and this situation doesn't change that, but I am reevaluating security. My wife and I went out to dinner and walked back to our hotel. We get inside our room and are setting things down, etc. A few minutes go by and there's a knock at the door. The man quietly says something in Spanish, in an inflection that's trying to get our attention. Think room service or something. My wife looks at me like wondering who would be at the door. At this point, I should clarify that we had the do not disturb tag on the door. A few seconds go by and there's another knock at the door. My wife signals for me to go to the door, and so I go over. At this point, we've made no sounds for probably a minute before and during the knocks. Just as I reached the door, the key card unlocked the door and it opened. A dirty looking man had just opened the door and was about 2 feet from my face. I put my hand on the door to prevent it from opening any further. I think he was as surprised as I was. He starts speaking Spanish and I hear the word Wi-Fi somewhere in there. I say, "No hablo español." In broken English, he tries to ask if the Wi-Fi is down. My wife says it's not. I'm just kind of shell-shocked by what just happened and keep my hand on the door as he talks and eventually leaves. I shut the door and engage the physical lock this time. I usually do this, but we had just walked in and wanted to set stuff down. I talk with my wife as we try to gather our thoughts about what just happened. Essentially, a man knocked, got no reply, then let himself in, and asked about Wi-Fi. No, this was a clear robbery attempt, and he has a master key card and thought we weren't home. A minute or two later after this went down and we've collected ourselves and understood what just occurred, I passed this information to the front desk in case this guy attempts any other doors. They seem to take it seriously. No updates beyond that. The fact that this just happened has my mind kind of blown, and I don't know if I've fully processed it yet. Like, what if we were back 30 minutes later? Probably would have lost some stuff. 5 minutes later, we walk in on a guy in our hotel room. What if we went to bed earlier tonight? Could have been asleep. The AC is loud, and I don't know if I would have heard the door knocking through my sleep. If it was going to go down, surely the way it did was optimal, but those ifs are crazy. I'll definitely be storing our valuables in the safe now. Should have done this too, but we just recently got here. Lesson learned. In the future, stuff is going immediately into the safe, and the lock is getting immediately engaged. Back in 1998, I was a pretty broke 19-year-old guy and living with a roommate named Steve. Steve was about my age, maybe a year older. His dad had died a few years prior and had left Steve a trust fund that covered all of his bills and gave him a weekly allowance on top of it until he reached a certain age, at which time he'd receive his full inheritance. Steve and I got along pretty well, but he was the kind of guy who liked to remind you if he had some degree of power over you. That aspect of his personality butted up against my own stubborn, prove the world wrong attitude on a particular night, leading to the events I'm about to describe. Steve and I went over to my friend Trevor's house on Siesta Key one night. Steve drove, as I didn't have a car. I don't remember why we went over there, and I don't even know that I really remember any other instance of the three of us hanging out. I just know that we went there later in the evening, maybe 9 o'clock or so. At some point, Steve and I got into a disagreement over something. I have no memory of what it was about, except that I seem to recall that it wasn't anything important that actually impacted our lives in any way. Something akin to disagreeing over a bit of movie trivia or something as inconsequential as that. Steve must have felt that he was losing the debate, because he took the opportunity to remind me that he had the car and I could always walk home. Now, there are a few things to note here. First, home would be a 13-mile walk. Could not have told you that at the time, but I just looked it up for this telling. Second, we were at my best friend's house. I had stayed over there countless times and absolutely could have that night. Third, my best friend also had a car, and would likely have given me a ride. So Steve's threat was completely empty, whether he realized it or not. But what was important to me at that moment was that Steve, the trust fund brat, wanted to exert control over me because his ego was bruised. And I was a stubborn hothead who would absolutely not stand for that shit. So I silently decided that I would walk home, just to spite him and show him that I wouldn't be intimidated. So a bit later, under the pretense of going to use the restroom, I left the room and quietly left the house and started the 13-mile walk home. I should note that while I knew this was a long walk, I didn't quite understand how long it was. But it didn't matter. I needed to prove my independence. It was probably 11 p.m. or so when I left the house. I anticipated that they'd come looking for me when they discovered that I had left, so I tried to stay off the main path as best as I could, determined to make the whole walk in order to make my point. This may be a good place to remind you that this is 1998, and a good 2 or 3 years prior before I got my first cell phone. The first hour and a half went by without incident. I made my way all the way to downtown Sarasota. The more direct route would have been to follow the main road along the waterfront, but I cut through downtown, still looking to avoid Steve spotting me on his way back home. This is an area I was super comfortable with. I'd spent most of my childhood in the area, and especially in my teen years, had explored every nook and cranny of the downtown area. It was also a pretty affluent area, full of high-rise condos that look over the Gulf of Mexico and known for theater, opera, and art galleries. As such, even past midnight, it didn't feel menacing at all, just quiet and empty. The path I'd chosen through downtown went along Pineapple Ave, which was mostly art galleries and upscale shops. As I walked along, I saw a red hatchback sitting in the middle of the road, just a little way past an intersection up ahead of me. I noticed it had no license plate, but didn't think too much of it. I figured it was a tag applied for kind of situation. As I got nearer, the car remained stopped. The interior light was on, and I could see there were 3 or 4 guys in there. The interior light being on made me assume they were looking at a map or something, though I couldn't make out the inside of the car well enough to see anything more than the general shapes of the people. As I crossed the small intersection, maybe 30 or 40 feet away from the car now, I suddenly got a really uneasy feeling. I don't know if the car was still for just too long or the figures inside too still or what. I just suddenly got to feeling very ill at ease. So instead of continuing on, I casually turned down the left side street, and as soon as the corner of the building blocked me from their view, I bolted. This was a spot where a small access road ran behind these buildings and then connected to an alley and then another. Very thin alley that ran alongside a church and ended back on Pineapple Ave, right where the red car was. I ran this sequence of alleys and popped out just in time to see the rear end of the car vanish down the side street I'd run down. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. I had the idea that the guys in that car had something unpleasant in mind for me, but I knew damn well that I had given them the shake. There's no way in hell that they'd expect me to be back where they started. If they were looking for me, it was going to be elsewhere. So I continued along, feeling smug. After 10 or 15 minutes, I pretty much had to get out on the main road, because the alternative was walking through a seedy neighborhood that I wasn't nearly as confident about as I was downtown. As I approached the first big intersection along that main road, I saw the red car again up ahead, noticeable by the lack of license plate. I kind of grinned to myself about having foiled them. On this big road, there were some other cars here and there, even at this late hour, so I felt less isolated and more at ease, until I saw the car slow to a crawl, despite not being anywhere near the light yet. Suddenly, I found myself wondering if they might have spotted me again, so I decided to just cross to the other side of the street. It's a US highway, so it's several lanes wide, with a median down the center. Being on the other side would put me a fair distance from them, but when I got to the other side, that's when I realized I was in actual danger. This red hatchback suddenly sped up, racing to the intersection ahead and zipping over into the left lane, where it banged a tire-screeching U-turn to head back in my direction. Where I had crossed was a nice green space between the History Center and the garden club where a gigantic tree stood. I think it was a banyan, but I could be mistaken. On the other side of that green space was a parking lot, some buildings, and the bay. I wasn't familiar enough with what was back there to be able to pull a trick like I had before, so I climbed. I got as high into that tree as I could, as fast as I could. I always dressed in all black back then, so I was pretty confident I'd be nearly impossible to spot, as long as they didn't actually climb up after me. So I got up and nestled into the most hidden spot I could and tried not to make any noise at all. Hiding up in the tree, I was so surrounded by foliage that I couldn't see what was going on. On the plus side, that meant they were really unlikely to see me. On the other hand, I didn't know what to prepare myself for, so I sat up there, running through scenarios in my head, trying to plan my next move. Even if I hadn't been outnumbered, flight was really my only option. As speedy and scrappy as I was at 5'3", no fight I put up likely was going to do much good. As I sat on that branch trying to plan my next move, my blood ran cold. Any remaining doubt about what was happening and fleeting hope that I was just being paranoid flew out the window as I heard car doors open and close, heard footsteps in the grass, and eventually an angry male voice say, "Where is this motherfucker?" Followed by a, "Look over there, I'll check this area." It was official. I was being hunted. I don't know how long I stayed up that tree. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes, and more likely it was quite a bit less than that. But it felt like forever. At some point, I decided to risk another flight, though I can't remember what triggered it. Car doors, the cars driving away, I just can't remember. I do remember jumping from the tree and landing with a hard thud and bolting back the way I had come as fast as I could, terrified that whatever sound made me feel like it was safe to come out of hiding had been employed to draw me out. At the intersection, where they had made the U-turn, was a 24-hour gas station. Of course, across both roads. All I could think was that if I could make it inside, I would be safe and I would call the police. That run is a total blur, but I remember going through the door, and I remember the look on the clerk's face as she saw my panicked expression. I called the police and explained what happened, and I waited inside for them to arrive. When they got there, I went out front to meet them and explained everything to the only officer who actually spoke to me. He was not sympathetic. I had described the car in detail as well as all the events, and he said that they probably thought I was a male prostitute and were trying to pick me up. I thought to ask him if prostitutes get a lot of business by fleeing from prospective Johns and hiding in trees, but I was distracted by the sight of that red hatchback slowly cruising by, watching me talk to the police. I pointed to the car and exclaimed that was the car. The police seemed entirely uninterested. He glanced at the car for about half a second and looked back at me and said, "What do you want me to do about it?" "I don't want to walk anymore," I exclaimed. I'm sure there were better ways I could have articulated that there were people attempting to capture me for unknown nefarious purposes, and that I was in fear of my life, should they encounter me on the street again, but "I don't want to walk anymore" was all I was capable of in that moment. The cop pointed to the side of the police car and said, "You see what it says there? It says police, not taxi." His condescending attitude was doing a great job of replacing my fear with some of the brash attitude that had gotten me into this situation in the first place, so I replied, "It also says to serve and protect, and I'm asking you to protect me because I think I am in danger." He gave a sigh like a teenager, asked to do the dishes, and told me that he couldn't take me all the way because I lived in the next town and county over, but that he'd take me to the county line, which is another major intersection along that same main highway. That was still a good 5.5 miles from my house. Again, a number I just looked up for this telling. But it got me off the road for almost 3 miles and made it less likely these people would find me again. The cops dropped me off in front of the museum, and I walked another 2 hours or so, looking over my shoulder constantly, ready to run down side streets or jump into bushes if need be. My girlfriend's house was slightly closer than my own, and with the sun now rising, I knew she'd be okay with me stopping in. In the end, I made it safely and never saw that red car again. Almost 30 years later, I still sometimes wonder what might have become of me if they had gotten their hands on me. The determination they showed in pursuing me leads me to believe that nothing I can imagine, no matter how bad, is outside the realm of possibility. This begins back when I was 15. I'm 18 now. Just for some background, I work in a 5-star restaurant as a waitress in a sweet little area. We usually don't get anyone with bad intentions, usually just snobs. On Easter Sunday of 2022, one of the busiest days of the year, a man, who will be known as the Easter Man, came in looking for a table for one. He was in a 3-piece suit with a carton of chicken eggs. He was sitting in my section, so I went over to get a drink and food order. Once I got his order, he kept me talking, asking about my education, what I was doing in school, what my plans for the future were, and what my hobbies were, my name, etc., etc. Just a little too much to be polite, but I let it slide. I was busy, tired, and didn't want any trouble. Eventually, he left for the day. I thought that was that. For the next couple of months, he would come in 2 to 3 days every week. He got more confident, attempting to flirt with me, asking me to come out with him after work, etc. However, things got worse when one shift, I was walking him to his table and he slid his hands down my back and over my butt. I turned around and somehow politely told him to not touch me and to not push my boundaries, as I was only 15 and he knew that. I didn't serve him that day. A week later he came in. I refused to serve him once again. My manager took over his table, yet when everyone was on break and it was only me on the floor, he came inside. He knew by that point it was table service only and came up behind me, bringing his hands down my arms. I was shaken up, but politely, again, told him not to touch me. I didn't hear from him again until the next Easter of 2023. Things got worse. He showed up again, the usual shenanigans, yet my managers were prepped this year, not allowing me to go within the vicinity of him, keeping me safe. This was only useful inside of work. I walked through the town center to get to work. It's about a 25-minute walk from the train station. As I was walking to work one day, he saw me in his car and followed me into work. I immediately told my managers, who yet again told me to stay away from him. A week after that, I was having coffee before work, about a 15-minute walk away from my job, and what do you know? Guess who sees me and follows, on foot, to work? I again tell my managers, who keep me away from him yet again. But that day was different. He asked my managers for me, saying he knew I was there because he'd seen me. Took a lot of holidays around Easter time and was off a lot for exams. Supposedly, he came in a few times, asked for me, and didn't come in much when I wasn't anywhere to be seen. He hasn't come in since then. However, this Sunday is Easter Sunday. I got home around midnight, almost 1 a.m. from work. My neighborhood is usually dead quiet around that time. I live in a small suburban area where no one's ever really out late. I've been working late nights at the bar for the past 3 years, and in all that time, I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen someone else out walking that late, if at all. So seeing anyone on the sidewalk that hour immediately felt out of place. I was sitting in my parked car in front of my house, talking with my boyfriend on the phone before heading inside, just unwinding, not thinking much of anything. Out of pure habit, I glanced at my driver's side rearview mirror, and that's when I saw someone. I saw the swaying movement of legs, and I noticed a bright light bouncing with each step, lighting up the ground beneath them. It looked like it might have been a phone flashlight, but it was bright. As soon as they reached the sidewalk, they stopped, and then the light lifted, deliberately, perfectly, and aimed straight into my mirror, right at me. I got chills instantly. Still on the phone, I frantically told my boyfriend to hang on while I searched for my keys. My hands were shaking. I couldn't find my keys fast enough. I don't know why, but I felt like if I looked up again, that light would be closer. That whoever was holding it would be right next to my window. After what felt like an eternity, I found my keys, started my car, and bolted out of the neighborhood. As I turned the corner, the light faded from view. I tried to explain to my boyfriend, but I was so scared, all I could think about was putting distance between me and that block. The direction they were walking, there's a large cluster mailbox they could have possibly ducked behind. But aside from that, there's really nothing else. No cars, no fences, no trees. Just open sidewalk. Even the blocks I passed on the way to my boyfriend's, I didn't see a single person. To think that they could have been hiding like they got caught terrifies me. I don't know what I saw, but the way that light aimed perfectly at my mirror, it felt intentional. Predatory. Maybe it was paranoia. I do read a lot of horror. Maybe my brain was spinning stories because I started to doubt myself as I drove away. But my reaction of seeing that light, and really hoping that person would just keep walking, is what lets me know it was not safe.